Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last in our series of cybersecurity monthly tips. It's been a big year for everyone, and it'll be a interesting end. We're finishing up with incident response and insurance. Definitely been a long year, hasn't it? So I'd like to welcome Matt along again. Matt See from WatchGuard will be jumping in with a little bit of a background. I'll go through the year as it's been, and all of these have been recorded and will be available in the future for those who have missed them so far. In March, we started off with security assessments and technology policy. We then moved on to April with passwords, multi-factor authentication. And in May, we looked at protecting data for remote users as COVID came along and pushed our offices into new ways of working. June, we looked at business continuity and backup, and specifically making sure that your cloud products are being backed up just like you would anything else. July, we looked at firewalls and next generation AV and how the old way of doing things with having just a firewall and an AV to protect you is not enough in this day and age with zero-day exploits and having to move to next generation firewalls and endpoint detection and response. In August, we looked at detecting and tracking events, and with SIEM as the tool particular there to be able to make sure that you are seeing what's going on across your entire network, and at the same time being able to provide forensic data after the fact. September, we looked at patching and Internet of Things, and specifically looking at those devices that you don't think about on your network, such as TVs, and in the case of a casino that was breached through their thermometer for their fish tank, all those other little things that we never really think about. October, we looked at dark web scanning and security awareness training. That is looking at the dark web for stolen credentials when they come up for sale, and making sure that your staff are trained when it comes to security incidents and what they need to do to, one, stop a breach from happening, and two, give them a little bit of extra protection. November, we looked at email anti-spam and stopping the number one attack method, which is phishing, from coming into the business. And today, like I said, we'll be looking at incident response and insurance. So our agenda is we've been breached. What now? So what do you do after you've been breached? We look at cyber incident response planning, and we also look at cyber insurance policies, the last ditch for we've lost stuff, and can we get a little bit of money back to help us get through that, as the costs these days are quite horrific, and we'll discuss what Chubb's payouts have been in 2019. It'll be interesting to see their stats over the 2020 year as businesses moved out, and we saw increases of up to 300% in attacks during that. So why are we here? Well, Chubb Insurance paid out on average in 2019, $285,851 per claim, which is just a ridiculous amount. And funnily enough, only 20% of small to medium enterprises even have cyber liability insurance, which again makes me wonder what's going on there as the prevalence of this is getting higher. I think the current stats are 60-something% of small medium enterprises get attacked every year, and that's going up. And the average cost to Australian businesses is US 5.41 million, which I believe is a little bit on the low side, as globally it's sitting at around 400 billion a year. So we actually believe that a number of businesses just aren't actually reporting the cost of their cybercrime. And cyber attacks affected 5 million Australians, and an estimated cost to them at just over $1 billion. And information theft is the most expensive consequence of a cybercrime, followed by the business disruption itself. So definitely that data that they're stealing is what they're trying to get off of you, and the implications of that, if they crypto lock you or it's a phishing attempt and they lock down an account, is that it will disrupt your business and you are likely to lose money while you're trying to get back up and running. So as we've discussed over the previous ones, how does this all fit into the NIST Cyber Security Framework? Well, this is all about responding and recovering to that. What do you do when you've detected an event and it's managed to get through and you have an incident, how you respond to that and how you recover from that. So we've been breached, but I guess what now? I'm going to hand over to Matt See from WatchGuard, and he's going to take you through some options, and then we'll see, what do businesses do once they've been breached. Matt, over to you.
Excellent. So here we go, light entertainment part of the evening. My name's Matthew See. I'm the Manager for Sales Engineering in the APAC region for WatchGuard. And I'm really not talking too much about what we're going to do now. I'll actually leave that for David. But I will have a little bit of fun. I've got a couple of slides here about some of the big breaches that have happened. Now, not everything's going to make the news. And the two that I'm covering here were a little while ago, but they still have relevant stories about what we need to do for today. So the first one, Target, this was a really big famous attack that happened. And it really started with when a journalist called Brian Krebs actually broke the news around mid-December 2013. And at that time, this was the biggest credit card data breach in history, with 40 million cards stolen, over 70 million compromised accounts. And in fact, 10 years worth of data was stolen from the Target environment. And of course, the end result, this led to the CIO and the CEO resigning in 2014. But the real story is, back when and how this actually started. So there we go. Apparently the breach started around a month earlier. And the attackers actually installed point-of-sale malware on the Target's POS systems. And alarms were raised, this is the amazing part, but security had been outsourced and nobody was actually responding to those alarms. It was a terrible situation. And as the attack continued, there were more alarms, but again, no response. So now, of course, the card data was stolen, it was sold on the dark web. But the story actually does begin sometime before that with the initial reconnaissance. So this is the first step of every attack. People around probing your networks, having a look around and seeing what they can find. And in this case, it was not Target that were attacked. It was actually a vendor aligned with Target, they were a supplier, a heating, ventilation and air conditioning supplier. And of course, they were small compared to Target. They didn't spend money on security and they were an easy point of access. They had a VPN straight into the Target environment. So the attackers simply came across that VPN. And the amazing part was the attackers were able to get around the entire Target network through that link. So this breach was really about a month prior to becoming public knowledge. And some of the lessons here from this is the fact that, we do need better detection tools. We need to understand when things are going wrong in the network and sort of get in there as early as possible and find that. And we do need people to respond to and investigate those alerts. It's one of the big problems. There's always a lot of things, little noises going on around the network. It does take time and effort to look at that, but we'll look at a solution a bit later. And one of my big favorite things is to segment networks. So there's no way that, the attackers should have been able to look after the air conditioning systems, but then hop into their main Target network and then onto the point of sale network. That's just incredible that they could do that. And also, you should always consider the security of anyone who has remote access into the network. It doesn't matter if they're your own employee or if they're someone else. If they have remote access, you do need to consider that a threat. Now, the Sony hack was another similar story, again from that time period around late 2014. And we need to go look at the start of this. And you might think it started with, initially the Guardians of Peace from North Korea. They threatened the Sony CEO. And in fact, the story does actually go back to almost a year before that. And there's evidence of a phishing attack against the CFO and also a server being breached in Brazil. And they don't know if they were actually related to each other, but they were around the same time. And of course, malware was found on the network, and it suggested that, that malware predated the actual phishing attack and the even the email sent to the CEO. So it looks like this whole thing was going on for quite some time. And it actually looks like it was over a year that the malware was in, the network was compromised, and people just didn't realize this. So again, we're talking about those detection tools, understanding when things are going on, but also things like basic phishing protection. So when people are getting emails and they're clicking on links or opening attachments, you definitely need to be able to protect yourself against those sort of threats. Also, what we talk about these days is advanced threat protection. So this is where we get an idea about what's going on in the network at a much deeper level. So it's not purely about malware itself, it's about little things that are adding up to the final threat. And this is actually where threat hunting comes in as well, which is actually now a service that can be automated and provided through a lot of solutions. So you don't have to actually do this yourself. It's something that providers can do for you. And they're the ones who are going to help you spot these issues inside a network before the bad things really start happening. Now, the big question I have, is why that detection gap? It's amazing that people can be in your network for a year without being spotted. Well, it turns out, the problem is everything on the network is generating logs, maybe alerts as well. We've got firewalls, routers, servers, PCs, laptops, software, antivirus programs, all trying to tell us what's happening in our network. But the problem is all that data is useless unless you can make sense of what's normal and what's not. And that's where, you need to actually look at how to process this sort of information. Now, according to a recent SANS survey, 77% of respondents are collecting logs, but only 24% of them are actually reviewing the logs as part of a normal workflow. And only 10% of them felt confident in their ability to actually analyze, all those huge data sets and all that information that they're getting. So this is where a solution called Security, Incident, and Event Management comes in. And it's a simple way of just taking all that information and making it viewable in terms of, say, easily to understand visual analysis. So you can just look at a few graphs or, little execution chains and understand what's going on in the environment. And these are tools that are excellent at being able to give you that information about what is happening across your network. And you do definitely need to listen to them and also look for those alarms coming up. And through the visual analysis that you get through SIEM tools, it really does make it actually doable. It's something that you can actually now approach. So that's really handy. That does help us understand if we have been breached. But a lot of what David's going to be talking today, it sort of leans back to this particular document. This is from the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and this is about data breach preparation and response plans. So you need to get out there, you need to get ahead of these issues. And this guide has plenty of information about how to prepare for it and how to respond to a potential breach. And it's really important that you do assume that at some point you will be breached, you will have a problem. There's no hiding that fact. Someone's going to click on a link, someone's going to maybe even just lose a laptop with data on it. That constitutes a breach, it's a loss of data. So, it could be just isolated or it could be your entire network. But you just need to be prepared. You need to have policy, procedures, and plans. You need to train people as well for an event so they understand what to do if they think something has happened. And you also need to actually practice what happens with regular run-throughs of the procedures. I've done this a lot in my life. I used to work in financial networks, and we used to plan for and understand and prep for failure at any point in the network and understand what happens if a component fails, how we recover from that, how we move on from that. So this whole concept of business continuity is important as well. Now, of course, don't assume key personnel will be available when a problem really happens. That's one thing you definitely need to plan for. Of course, when something does happen, the key person that you need will probably be away on holiday, sitting on the beach somewhere. So you need everyone in your company to be able to actually step up and understand what needs to be done and what they can do to make sure that your data is protected. So I'll quickly throw back to David now. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks, Matt. And I 100% agree. It's one of those situations where it is easy to have a plan in place, but unfortunately, when the people just aren't there, what do you do? Which is why it's important to make sure that is the case and you have people trained to back them up. I've been through that before, and it's never a fun thing when it's not actually something that's been planned for. So we love the OAIC 4 steps, except the one thing they seem to miss is recovery, and we think that's an important one to add in there. But basically, it's immediate containment, looking at what's happened and doing what you can immediately to stop anything. So if it's a single computer that you've found a breach on, being able to deal with that there, or at least make some intelligent choices right at the beginning to sort of minimize and mitigate what might be happening. Then sitting down and actually assessing the incident properly and making sure you spend the time and effort to go through what's happened and find out what went on, why, and what you can do. Then the appropriate notification to those who are involved, whether that be internal, external, insurance, police, OAIC, whoever it may be. Systems recovery generally happens at the notification time as you're bringing things back online. And then after everything's done, make sure you do a post-incident review, and then you can go back through and look at your policies and procedures and make sure you're moving in the right direction. So let's start with immediate containment. I guess the first thing we suggest everyone does is actually talk to their IT as soon as a staff member's found, what could be a possible breach. Get IT involved. Find out, what may have happened, and at least start that process. We've got clients who've had things like phishing attempts where they've lost credentials through a phishing attack, and we tell them the first thing they need to do is pick up the phone and ring us. Currently, the time frame from loss of a password to it being used in an active attack is 19 minutes. So the window of opportunity there is kind of small to make sure you start getting things done. And that goes into the containment side of it, looking at how do we contain this as quickly as possible and minimize anything that may happen. And that could be changing a password from a phishing attack, or unplugging a computer, switching it off, or pulling the network cable out to minimize if something's gone on. And definitely convene your team. So if you've got a suspicion of an incident, that triggers your incident response plan that we brought up in one of our previous ones. And that's the point where you get your response team together, whether they be the people that are available and normally hit it, or whether they be your 2 ICs or 3 ICs, in order to make sure that you've got your team ready and you can start looking at what's gone on. But this sort of triggers very quickly, and it's something that you just need to be aware of, that you do have a very small time frame to start getting this process moving. Step 2, assessing the incident. Start gathering your evidence. Start looking at all those logs. Start getting your SIEM tools and pulling everything together to see what's gone on, and start going through it with a fine-tooth comb. You are able to take, you don't have to wait till the stage to go back and start fixing things up. This is a point where you can take some immediate actions to limit further harm as well. Maybe your systems have gone down, but you need to, put them off to the side and bring up new ones to keep running your business. You are in a business continuity stage, so, work with your business continuity planning and do what's right for the business. But at the same time, take the time to actually assess what happened and make sure you do this thoroughly. It's missing things here that can really affect some of the later stages. You have asset lists of all your systems, go through them, look how things connect, look how things are working together. Don't forget any of those cloud services too, and how they may be affected. And, make sure that you treat all systems the same. You may decide that a system might sit outside of it, but it could have been where the breach came through, as was highlighted with the HVAC provider that was the entry point into the network for target. It could be something as, unusual as that, but you do have to weigh it up and make sure that you are looking at things across the board, not just ruling things out immediately. And then look at, who had access to the data, what was taken, and how was it taken. That can help narrow things down as well. You may find that some of the data that was accessed, wasn't as serious as it could have been, and that the harm there to individuals was kept quite low. But it's something you really need to have a bit of an eye on, and that's where tools such as SIEM give that level of transparency. As I've called them, they're the flashlight that allows you to look under the rock and see all those little, things crawling around, and give you that level of detail. So it's something to keep aware of for the OAIC and notifying of a data breach. You do have 30 days to do this. So we recommend that you actually use at least 4 weeks of that 30 days to make sure you do a thorough assessment and make sure that what happened does fall under the serious harm. You don't actually have to notify a data breach unless it was serious harm to individuals. And they've got some examples there that include that, such as financial loss, serious psychological harm, or damage to someone's reputation. So you do have to weigh this up, but at the same time, it's a decision that your business needs to make based on the criteria that the OAIC give you and following through their process there. But you have 30 days to do that. So we definitely think that you should not rush this process, and you should take your time to make sure that you're doing it right. And during that time, we move on to the appropriate notification stage. And we think that, you don't want to go out quickly and say something publicly when you can take a bit of time to assess it and make sure that the message is consistent and, helps to limit the reputational damage done to your business as well as those that may be affected in the breach. So as per our incident, response planning, using the communications plan as part of that. Make sure you are getting the who is responsible to be telling people what, and what exactly are they saying, who are they saying it to, and where are they putting that up. We don't want to move to stage one of publicly putting it up and sticking it on our website when we find after a full assessment that the damage was pretty minor and no data was lost, or the data that was lost may have been a marketing materials or something like that. So it's something that you do need to weigh up. Make sure you also communicate internally to staff, managers, and your board, and make sure that everyone is getting the same message and that only those responsible are communicating out to the public. That way, you are making sure that you're saying the same thing. It's not, one in staff internally has said something else to a reporter, and the communications, person responsible for that for the business is saying another thing. So make sure that everyone is on the same page here. It's certainly worth protecting the business as well as those individuals who have lost the data, and making sure you do that appropriately. And then looking at those you need to talk to externally. OAIC, only if required. You don't have to lodge that breach if you don't actually have a breach that has caused serious harm. Your insurance provider is definitely one to talk to early in this picture. You want to make sure that you are able to claim, and the costs for this can add up. And we'll go through those a little bit further in, but definitely bring them on board as soon as possible to make sure that they know what's going on. And any law enforcement government departments, we've found that some of these incidents have required going to police and saying, somebody internally may have done it, or there's this, suspected somebody else or something like that. And then lastly, those who have actually been affected by that breach, being able to go to them and advise them what went on. We certainly recommend, even though you may not need to log it as a notifiable data breach, that if somebody's data was affected, no matter how minor, that you notify them of that, just so that they are transparent and aware of it. We think that actually will do less reputational damage than trying to obfuscate and hide it. We think that being transparent, actually in this day and age of so many incidents happening, will be beneficial for your company. Step 4 is systems recovery. Looking to remediate any damage using post-breach tools. There are certain tools out there that are great of going through systems, being able to pull out any malware, being able to provide that forensic data to see what's going on and clean those systems so that they can be put back into production. Any systems that can't be put back into production that way can be recovered or rebuilt from backups. Certainly, we think that backups are a last line of defense and you shouldn't rely on them, but at the same time, you should make sure that your backups are in such a place that you can bring systems back. And at the same time, you may need to change credentials. If any credentials have been done, have been affected during the incident, that you may need to go through and change those. And we also recommend that any systems credentials after any breach are changed regardless, just to protect any administrative access there. And lastly, post-incident review. Look at your policies and adjust them for what went on. Make sure that your business is appropriately covered, and any policies there cover any incidents that may have happened or anything you think may happen. And same with your procedures. Whether it be you've had a business email compromise and you're a solicitor and you settled a conveyancing into the wrong bank account, maybe you need to change the procedure there so that people are ringing up on any changes of bank account details to confirm with those people involved versus just automatically actioning it. And educate your staff. Make sure your staff are involved in it. Tell them what happened, tell them why it happened, and what they can do in the future. Being able to increase the amount of people that are looking for or aware of what may go on makes a big difference in a business. Having the people involved, whether it be IT firms or internal staff, just to be able to sit there and raise their hand and go, look, I think something's gone on, makes a huge difference. And it goes back to being able to catch it quickly and early. And this sort of applies to third parties as well. If somebody internally knows something's gone wrong and they need to contact a third party, someone needs to follow up and make sure that third party is actually acting on that evidence that's come up and moving into this 5-step process. So let's have a little bit of a look at cyber liability insurance. There are a number of ways you can cover yourself and a number of different areas you can cover. You can have it as an extension under a standard business policy or a management liability policy, or as common nowadays, looking at standalone insurance policies such as what Chubb offer in order to protect yourself. We believe that the standalone policies are generally have wider coverage and more inclusions, and they don't cost a hell of a lot. There's some good ones from Chubb and Jewel, so there's definitely options there, and we think you should shop around, talk to an insurance broker. If they're not as over the cyber liability side, we certainly have an insurance broker that is, and we can put you in touch with somebody who knows what's going on and the different policies there. And you can look at things like social engineering. If you've got management or board who might be attacked and have a risk of, losing their, credentials and having their own personal fraud, and through a social engineering attack or something similar as a risk vector, we believe that it's worthwhile looking at as part of a management liability policy or under a standalone cyber liability and making sure you're covered. We think this is an area that's definitely starting to become more prevalent as the amount of attacks through phishing are becoming more targeted, and we're moving to spear phishing attacks for those at the top. So a spear phishing attack is where somebody who has a particular, access to information, say a CEO or a CFO, is individually targeted with very tailored information. So maybe someone's gone through their LinkedIn or their Facebook accounts, or maybe they've had their email hacked, or the email of their EA has been hacked, and they've been able to access through that, and they've been able to target them a lot more directly, and that's a spear phishing attack. And this is certainly becoming more prevalent. So we think that having that social engineering part is certainly something to look at. Other things to keep in mind, look at the cost of decontamination and recovery. You want to have that covered all out by an insurance policy. Also, business interruption loss is a big one. A lot of policies don't actually cover you for loss of money due to the business interruption, and we believe that that's a necessity. The amount of sales you'd lose or the amount of time, to be able to go through this, it needs to be covered. And then there's the incident response and investigation costs that are involved in it, and these can add up quite quickly. If you've got people working 24/7 to get you operational and back online, and you're having to pay for all those overtime on top of the actual investigation to find out what went on, these costs certainly add up. And then you've got things like your crisis communications and reputation mitigation. This is something where it is worth looking to a third party who has expertise in dealing with these situations to make sure what you're saying is, not overly protective of your own business and at the expense of those people who may have lost data, or vice versa, and being able to make sure that you are saying the right thing and consistently. And then you have any future liabilities for loss of that data, and this is something to think about. And then there's the, if you're a third party that's sharing your data with another firm, you may have that liability from the unauthorized use of your network going on there, and that's something to keep in mind. And then there's the actual costs of blackmail. A lot of these policies will actually cover you for the Bitcoin to have things unlocked, and that's something to keep in mind. Bear in mind, though, that having things unlocked is not necessarily a good answer, because you may find that since they've compromised your systems, they still have a number of things in place even once you have your data back. So just keep in mind that there are a number of things in these policies to cover, and making sure that you are getting the right amount of coverage so that you aren't out of pocket should something happen. So Chubb provided a number of examples in their report on these cyber liability claims in 2019. We've picked out a couple of these just to give you an idea of, what goes on, what are some of the expenses you may be able to see based on the size of business, and to give you a bit of an idea of why insurance is something that we believe is just as a necessity these days, certainly as the amount of attacks are getting higher and higher every year. So looking at a smaller manufacturer, 10 employees turning over around $3 million, they leased a copying machine, i.e. a multifunction printer, and they returned that at the end of the lease to that third party. They found that the printer had actually been keeping data on it as jobs were sent to it, and that a person in the third party, a rogue employee, was able to access that machine's data and then sold that data. So they incurred $75,000 in connection with the forensic investigation and the restoration services, along with their lawyers' fees, and then post that another $100,000 legal defense cost and $275,000 in indemnity with the theft and sale of the data. So when you're looking at those numbers, you're up to almost $500,000 for literally having a multifunction printer that was returned to the supplier, and the supplier's employees stealing the data off that and selling it. So what sounds like a fairly reasonable thing to do, hiring a printer and returning it, ended up costing a fairly large amount. And they were lucky that Chubb had insured them and was able to pay out those costs. So looking at a little bit of a larger business, a legal firm with 55 staff turning over around 20 million. So, this was a network that was hacked, and they lost a lot of sensitive client data as part of that hack. And the group was seeking, $10 million not to place it for sale. And unfortunately, this happens fairly frequently. We've stolen your data, and here's a link to Bitcoin. We're asking X amount of dollars, or we'll put it up for sale. You have no guarantees that even paying that will stop them from selling it, and you have no abilities to, really reason with somebody who's already done a criminal act at this point. So they incurred costs of $2 million there for their forensic investigation and the negotiations around the extortion and ransom payments. And, it was a fairly large cost to get that data back for them. And they also lost $600,000 of business income that was associated with it. And during that time, they had to get it back. So there's another, what would seem like a fairly small incident, through someone's email or something like that. And unfortunately, this has happened in a number of law firms in the Brisbane market. So it's not a isolated or unusual incident. But even looking at that, $2.6 million to rectify that situation, that's certainly a large amount of lost income. We're talking 15% of a business that's turning over 20 million. So it certainly adds up for that. And I don't think many businesses are prepared to pay that sort of money or have the cash flow there to do it. So this is something that we think insurance is useful. It may not stop an incident from happening, but if you do have an incident that happens, it'll generally cover you for the expenses there. Obviously, no one wants to go through this. It's a stressful process, and regardless of whether you're having the expenses paid for, these are immediate ones. We don't know what the long-term reputational damage will be on a firm such as this, that, doing the right things in the beginning to protect yourself makes a big difference and will help mitigate a lot of these things happening. But as it gets more prevalent, we think that it's still something that you need to have in place just in case. And the costs aren't particularly high these days, so it's definitely something worth ensuring you have there. This has been a good end to our series, and there's certainly been a lot of information. I'm going to thank Matt for a fantastic year and a number of these presentations. It's certainly been great to have him along on this adventure, and it's been great to present all of these throughout the year, detailing every aspect of cybersecurity and what we can do as a business to prevent it, and at least at the end of the day, provide a little bit of insurance in case things do go wrong.
Thanks, David.